Exodus chapter 33. We'll begin at verse 1. And the Lord said unto Moses, Depart, and go up hence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto the land which I swear unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, Unto thy seed will I give it. And I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. For I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in the way. And when the people heard these evil tidings, they mourned, and no man did put on him his ornaments. For the Lord had said unto Moses, Say unto the children of Israel, Ye are a stiff-necked people. I will come up into the midst of thee in a moment, and consume thee. And therefore now put off thy ornaments from thee, that I may know what to do unto thee. And the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by the Mount Horeb. And Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that every one which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle of the congregation, which was without the camp. And it came to pass, when Moses went out unto the tabernacle, that all the people rose up and stood every man at his tent door, and looked after Moses until he was gone into the tabernacle. And it came to pass, as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord talked with Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose up and worshipped every man in his tent door. And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. And he turned again into the camp, but his servant Joshua the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. And Moses said unto the Lord, See, thou sayest unto me, Bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight. Now therefore, I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. And he said, My presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. And he said unto him, If thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. For wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? Is it not that thou goest with us? So shall we be separated, I and thy people, from all the people that are upon the face of the earth. And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. Now this account is after Moses had gone up into the mount, and he had been there, and he'd received the Ten Commandments in the stone. But then he came down, and the people had made them an idol. They had taken their gold and their silver and made an idol, and Aaron helped them to make it, and so they were worshiping the idol. And after Moses had somewhat dealt with that situation and that problem, it says, the Lord said unto him, Depart and go up hence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, and go to the land that I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he said, I'll give it to you, and I'll send an angel before you to drive out all the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Amorites. And he said, but it's a land flowing with milk and honey. But he says, I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in the way. And so God was kind of saying to Moses, well, we said we were going to give him the land. We were going to do what we said we would do. But it's kind of like here they were at Horeb, the Mount of God. And God was saying, I'll just stay right here. You going over there. And certainly there was some concern about that. There was some awareness of their need of God. And I believe as we read through it, what we see is, as Moses says, I'm not leaving you here. I will not go without you. And so God spoke to him. He says, there's stiff-necked people, and I would maybe consume them in the way, in their condition, in their outlook, so to speak. He says, they're such a people, I would maybe consume them. So I need to stay outside the camp. Well, one of the things that tells us is when we think about what we see here is, it's a wonderful thing to enjoy the presence of God, but a stiff-necked people cannot enjoy the presence of God. And so Moses went to the people and he said, well, here's the word from God. He says, you're stiff-necked people. God is not pleased with a stiff-necked people. And so when the people heard this, it says they mourned, and no man put on him his ornaments. For the Lord had said, you're a stiff-necked people. I'll come up in the midst of thee in a moment and consume thee. Therefore now put off thy ornaments from thee, that I may know what to do unto thee. And so it says they stripped themselves of their ornaments. And we think about those ornaments, it's an interesting thing. Here in this picture, what we're seeing is God says, take all that stuff away. I will decide what to do with you, but they need to get rid of all of that stuff first. And we consider it in this light, it was much different than things are today. It says they took off their ornaments. So they got rid of all their jewelry and all of that stuff. They did not come into the presence of God that way. They had to come into the presence of God differently, because with all of that stuff, they were a stiff-necked people. And we think about all of that stuff. Here's the thing. When people start loading themselves up with jewelry and such as that, what they're really trying to do is make themselves seem better than the people around them. We don't notice it maybe so much in our society, though I think it's very much there. But you go, for example, to India, and the amount of gold and stuff you're wearing helps to identify what caste you're in. Whether you're the poor guy down on the bottom or the important guy up at the top. Well, when we come into the presence of God, we're not going to impress him with how much money we got. We're not going to impress him with how well dressed we are. We're not going to impress him with our wonderful appearance. He's looking for people with a humble heart. And certainly they had to put all of those things if they were not going to be a stiff-necked people. People that was there to put themselves on show. When we go to worship God, we're not there to tell Him how good we are or how great we are or how wonderful we are. We're there to honor Him, to see Him in all of His greatness, in all of His goodness. And so these people, they had to mourn. They had to acknowledge the evil that they had done by worshiping idols. And yet we look back then and, their idol was a calf made out of gold. But we look at it today, many times people want to come to God, but they still want to hold on to all their idols. All the things that really, if they would admit it, are more important to them than God. God says that's a stiff-necked approach. Basically God's saying I can't operate with that. He needs people to come to Him humbly and acknowledge their need of Him, recognize that He is what matters in all that we do. And so these people began to mourn. They took those ornaments and put them all off, and they needed God. But at the same time, it says Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, a long ways away, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that everyone which sought the Lord had to go out there to God. And I think that pictures a little bit of what it means even to serve God today. We think about how that Paul in his writings, he wrote to the people at Corinth, and he says, listen, light and darkness don't work together. Good and evil are not going to have harmony. He says you need to come out from among them and be separate and not touch the unclean, or not be a part of that which is evil and wrong. So if they wanted to go to God, there was a coming out. They had to leave the camp and go out to the tabernacle where God was and come to see Him on His terms, in His way. And so it tells us that in time, Moses went out there, and when Moses went to the tabernacle, every man stood at the door of his tent and looked towards the tabernacle until Moses went in. And so they watched, and when Moses went there, the cloudy pillar descended and stood on the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. And it tells us that when Moses went there, the Lord talked with him, and they talked face to face, as a man speaks unto his friend. Now, in our walk with God, that is the relationship that we want, that we can talk to God as our friend. And Moses was there, and he talked with God, and maybe part of what's recorded after that is the conversation they had. But it says that when the conversation, he stopped talking with God, he turned and went again into the camp. But it makes a note, and I think it's an interesting note. It says, but Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. And the part I think that's interesting, as we begin the chapter, Moses said, you said depart, and he says, I'll send you. But Moses said, you haven't told me who's going to go with me. You haven't told me. You said that you'd send the angel of the Lord, but you haven't told me. And I think about it in a way, you might say it's picturing here that, Joshua ultimately was the one that went before them into the land of Canaan. Went into that land, and he stayed there. Moses said unto the Lord, See, thou sayest unto me, bring up the people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. And so here was, you might say, Joshua still standing there before the Lord, and Moses was saying, we need someone to go before the people into the land. And he says, I don't know who it is, but I believe God, even at that point in time, was looking at Joshua saying, here's the one we're going to send. Here's the one that will take the place of Moses when it comes time to go into the land. And so he said, bring this people, I don't know whom thou wilt send, yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast found grace in my sight. Now in our walk with God, we need to come to that same place. I know thee by name, and thou hast found grace in my sight. And that's the thing that we want in our relationship with God, is to know that we have found grace in His sight. And we have found favor. We think about, you read about different ones in the Bible, we know that it says of Moses, he found grace in God's sight. And so God chose him to build the ark and to preserve a people. And here we find God saying to Moses, he found grace. We know that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, we believe, also found grace in God's sight. But now it's up to us. We need to come to the same place where God knows us by name and we've found grace in His sight. And Moses says, if I found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. And so Moses says, if I found grace in your sight, show me the way. Show me how I should go. And as our walk with God, that should be our thought as well. God, you've chosen me for your own. Now I need to see the way. And we know the way is Jesus, that they spoke often of Him as the way. You read through Acts and it speaks of the way, which was Jesus. And if we found grace in God's sight, He should bring us to Jesus, and by Jesus bring us to Himself, that we may know Him even as others that came before us have known Him. And what God said to Moses, He says, my presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. And we're thankful that God can speak to our heart the same way and say, my presence will go with thee. I will give thee rest. Certainly, it is in God's presence that we find rest. Without Him, just as Moses said, if thy presence go not with me, carry me not up hence. Moses was kind of saying, Lord, if you're not going with me through all of this wilderness and stuff to the land of Canaan, He says, we'll just stay right here at this mountain. This is where you're at, so we're going to stay right here with you. We're not going any further if we have to go without you. And in our walk with God, it needs to be the same way. God, I don't want to go anywhere without you. I want to be with you where you're at, and certainly we know that God is able to guide our lives, to direct us by His presence. And so, as Moses so desired His presence, and you think about all the times that Moses went through, I can understand why he very much wanted God's presence. All the times the people came to him and says, why did you ever lead us out of Egypt? Look at the thing you've got us into. We're out here in the middle of trouble. And most of the problems they had, Moses couldn't solve. God had to solve it. And so I can understand him saying, I am not going to take on the challenge of seeing to it that these people have water, that they have food, that they have everything else they need without you, because I can't do it. And really in our lives we realize the same thing, that we cannot do what lies before us without God. So the most important thing we can do is have God's presence, and certainly when God bestows His grace upon us, that is the real grace that we're enjoying, is the presence of God Himself to help us with everything that we face. He says, "For wherein shall it be known here that I have found, that thy people have found grace in thy sight?" So here's how we know when we've the grace of God has been bestowed upon us. "Is it not that thou goes with us?" And so it is the grace of God when we have the presence of God with us. The grace of God is more than just forgiveness. We think about these people, certainly they needed forgiveness. They had worshipped an idol. They broke you might say, the first commandment of the 10 Commandments before they had them written down, so to speak. And yet, God's grace upon them, God's mercy to them, was that He go with them. And so it is with us. We seek God for forgiveness of sins, and we seek God that we might be reconciled to Him. But how else are we going to know that we've been reconciled to God than God walks with us? That He's there with us every day from that point forward. We can go to Him with our needs, with our problems, and find help for those needs and problems. And so the grace of God is that God, having reconciled us through the work and the sacrifice, the blood of Christ, and the new life in Christ, then He goes with us, and we enjoy His presence. It says, "So shall we be separated, I and thy people, from all the people that are on the face of the earth." You know, that tells us how we identify God's people. He says, we'll be separate. Sometimes we think, we read in the New Testament, it says, "Come out of her, my people, and be separate." Well, here is how God's grace is bestowed upon us. We are separated from the world, from all the people that are upon the face of the earth, except God's people. There is a separation unto God. And in that separation, there is the presence of God at work in the lives of His people. So there's a separation that happens. And when we come to know God and we're living for Him, it's very simple. When you're in the kingdom of light, you will not have any ties into the kingdom of darkness. And so people are separate. And that's the separation that separates God's people from all the other people on the earth, is that God goes with us. That we have God's presence. People can look for many different things, but the thing that will distinguish God's people is God's presence in their lives. We could say, well, I'm a Christian. I go to church on Sunday. I put money into it. I put time into it. But the question is, do we have God? I mean, that's the difference between a sinner and a saint. In very simple terms, is the saint has God at work in their life, and the sinner's still going on without him, without his presence there. And so this is a good picture of how God did his work, how God's work of salvation in reality works, is that people separate themselves from the world and its ways and its idols and those things, and come without the camp to the tabernacle of the congregation, to that which God has provided, and they come to God desiring his presence, desiring his grace to be bestowed upon them, so that they can walk with him right here and live for him and enjoy his presence in all that they face. And they're going to face a lot of things. And when we get saved, we face a lot of things too. There's various things that maybe we don't understand, various things that we don't know. And in all of those things, we may go through some trials and some tests, but we can go through them with confidence, and we can go through them with assurance when we have the presence of God with us, his grace upon our lives, him right there to be our help that we can go to, and we can tell him the things that we need, and he can provide them. And so it says, the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken. For thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. So sometimes people talk about the witness of God's Spirit in their salvation. That's really what the witness of the Spirit conveys to us. You found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. I know who you are. I know you as one of my own. And in that relationship, we are able to go forward and walk with God. And He can bring us in that relationship from where we are at. He can bring us all the way into His presence to be with Him throughout eternity. But we need that grace bestowed upon us, that He accepts us as one of His own. He has made us one of His own. He has done a work in our heart so that we can walk along together down here. Now if we turn over to Psalm 46, in Psalm 46, we'll begin reading at verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. So the psalmist starts here and he says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. It is by God's presence that we have a defense, we have strength, we have one to take care of us. He says, therefore will not fear, though the earth be removed. If the earth was removed and the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Jesus recounted there how he told the disciples, he says, if you say unto this mountain, be cast in the midst of the sea, and doubt not, that mountain can be moved and cast into the midst of the sea. So we think about these things and we realize that I don't believe Jesus or this writer here was necessarily talking about literally a mountain being cast into the midst of the sea. Though if you go out on some of these islands that are made of volcanoes and stuff, certainly they could erupt and they could end up in the middle of the sea. We don't picture it, but that big tsunami they had, I believe, and it's back in the news. There's a volcano on that mountain, and the last time it erupted, they had that tsunami because the whole side of the mountain fell off in the ocean, and it created that big wave that killed so many people. So mountains can be cast in the midst of the sea, literally, though we realize that things can happen and change comes about. He says, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled. And we think about the sea and the waters thereof roaring and being troubled. And, if you study Revelation, the sea is kind of used as a type of people. And there's a lot of things that can happen where there's chaos and there's dissension and troubles. And there's things are shaking. Things are in a state of change. But when all of that kind of thing is going around us, even as some of the stuff that's going on around us now, it says God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Sometimes the devil would like us to maybe feel like God's very far away. But as the writer says here, He's present in trouble. He's present to be there with us. And so we, like Moses, from time to time, we may have to go to God and say, God, I need to once again spend some time in your presence. I need a present help. I need you right here with me in all of these troubles. Because we're going to go through troubles, but we're glad that we can have assurance. And the assurance we have is because that we know God is right there with us, looking on, and that He cares for us in all of these things that come. Now he goes on to say, he says, there is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. He says, God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. So we think about it. He says there's a river that makes glad. The city of God. The place of the tabernacles of the Most High. When we think about it, you read about that river. God said that He would be within us, a river flowing out. But we know that it's talking about the Spirit of God. It's talking about His workings. It's talking about His help and His manifestation in the lives of His people. And we can all draw on that river and be strengthened by it. Said God is in the midst of her. And we're glad that God can be present. Certainly if we think about the city of God, we could say the church of God. God is present in the midst of His people. And because of it, that city of God, God's people, do not have to be moved, even though the world around us is in upheaval. And certainly we've lived through a time in our lifetime when many things have come and gone, and there has been a lot of upheaval. We would make an observation that as far as the world is concerned, the sinful world, things have not gotten better. They've gotten worse. In fact, we watch what's going on in the world, and it's reached the point that sometimes you go, people are just totally irrational anymore. We supposedly got here through the Enlightenment and rationalism, but we live in a world today where people say there is no such thing as truth. Well, and then you think about it, you go, what about what you just said? There is no such thing as truth. Well, your truth is not true. And you find out most people say there is no such thing as truth except the things that I say. Well, God help us. that's a very unstable situation. That's a very unstable foundation. There is such a thing as truth. And one time he walked among men here, said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And we're glad we can go to him. And what God has given to us by his presence through Jesus Christ, we don't have to be moved. People can say, well, that isn't, that might have been accepted 200 years ago, but we don't do it that way anymore. Well, God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And we can do things that way. We can still live moral lives. We can still live righteous lives. We can still live godly lives right here in this present world, because God is present and he's here to help us. And he says, and that right early. The idea being, he'll help her right early. He'll help her when we need it. We can go to him and we can find the help that we need. It says, the heathen raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice and the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. And that should be our testimony as the people of God. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. He's the one we're counting on. He's the one we're depending upon. And when we get into situations and difficulties and troubles, we go to him with the expectation that God will come and help us in the very things that we face, in the things that we're going through. And I'm sure that this difficult time, God will see us through it. We want to be faithful to keep our eyes on him. Certainly there's much that's distressing about it, the choices, the ways that people are being affected. But we can go to God, and God can bring us through it. And I believe in it, God would like to establish a testimony before the people through those that are living and walking with him. So he says, come, behold the works of the Lord, what desolations he hath made in the earth. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in sunder. He burns the chariot in the fire. So he said, come behold the works of God. God can take things that men think are so important and so strong and so powerful, and he can just, like he says here, he can break the bow, he can cut up the spear, he can burn the chariot. God can take those things and show that they're really not of great substance or great significance. But he says, here's what we need to do. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. So he says, come behold the works of the Lord. And you know, one of the interesting things, and I don't have it written down, but I was reading, I believe it was in John. And Jesus, at one place he says, I do the works of my Father. And so he's saying, the things I'm doing, I do it by God. I do it by God's power. And then in another place he goes on and say, greater works than these shall you do also. And in another place it's worded, you're going to see these works of God. Certainly as we read through Acts, one of the things we understand, as God is present in his people, God works in the lives of his people so that people can see God, even through those who are yet here in this world, alive and living for him. We know that Jesus did many wonderful things. But as you read through the Acts, one of the things you'll see is Many of the things that were done by Jesus were also done by Peter and Paul. And there were people healed. There were dead folks raised. There were numerous things that God was able to work through His people here. And in that time, and what we need to see is God can still work in the lives of His people today. We would not want to get the idea, some do, they say, well, that only lasted about 200 years and then it hadn't been that way. Well, certainly some people have convinced themselves of that God doesn't do any of that stuff anymore. But then I read lives of people that they say, God did do this. You read about the lives of D.S. Warner and some of those people. They prayed for dead people to be raised. They prayed for people to be healed of their sicknesses. And they certainly had testimonies of people that that was what had happened in their case. I put it in a little more current perspective. I had someone tell me last summer where we were at a certain place, he said, I talked to a woman who said she saw a dead child raised up. That Brother Byram, I think, and some of them prayed for that child. And the child was dead. They'd quit breathing and everything. And the child got up and was playing. People say, well, that don't happen anymore. That happened. No, if God is present, God can still do the things He did when Jesus was here. And we need to accept and believe that God is able to work in our lives greater things than we maybe can comprehend. But when He does, we need to be still. We need to know that He is God, and He will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. So God is going to manifest Himself in the lives of His people. We don't know what all ways He will do it, but we need to know that as long as God is with us, we've got someone that can work in situations that we look at and go, I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't have it figured out. We don't have to have it figured out. All we need to know is that we can take it to God, and God can do whatever needs to be done. And so as people of God, as Christians, we need to be able to say, even as they said back then, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. He's what we're counting on. People look on and they might say, well, you seem to be not particularly upset about all of these things. Well, I realize that the situation is very interesting. But you know, at the same time, we should be able to tell people, hey, God's with me, and God's going to take care of me. And so I don't have to spend my time all upset and stressed out by it. I just need to be able to draw upon the presence of God and go to Him with the things that we face and be able to put them in His hands. Cast those cares upon Him. Just like He told us to do. He says, cast all your cares on me because I care about you. I'm going to take care of you. We have found grace in His eyes, and by it we have been able to know God and have a relationship with Him. So that we, just like that song we sang, I know on whom my faith is fixed. I know God is there for me, and that is my strength and my confidence. Now if we turn over to Isaiah, the 42nd chapter, in Isaiah chapter 42, certainly in some ways he's describing the coming of Christ. If we begin at the beginning of the chapter, but we will start down in the chapter a little ways. But God wanted them to know He still cared about them. Certainly, if you read Isaiah, the first about 39 chapters are kind of like gloom and doom. But in chapter 40 then, it's like the prophet begins to try to encourage the people and help them to understand that God really still cares about them. He wants to do things for them, but that they need to turn to God so that they would be able to walk with Him and be His people. So in Isaiah 42, beginning at verse 10, it says, "Sing unto the Lord a new song, and His praise from the end of the earth. Ye that go down to the sea, and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof. Let the wilderness and the cities thereof lift up their voice, the villages that Kedar doth inhabit. Let the inhabitants of the rock sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountain. Let them give glory unto the Lord, and declare His praise in the islands. The Lord shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yea, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. I have long time holden my peace. I will be still and I have been still and refrained myself. Now I will cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. I will make waste mountains and hills, and dry up all of their herbs. And I will make the rivers islands, and I will dry up the pools. And I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and not forsake them. They shall be turned back. They shall be greatly ashamed that trust in graven images, and that say to the molten images, Ye are our gods." So he says, sing unto the Lord a new song, praise His name from the ends of the earth. Ye that go to the sea, and the inhabitants of the islands, and the wilderness, and the cities thereof, lift up your voice. Let the inhabitants of the rocks sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountain. Let them give glory to the Lord and declare His praise. Certainly what he's saying is all of those that maybe feel like that God has not been there, he says the Lord's going to go forth as a mighty man. He'll stir up jealousy like a man of war. He'll cry, he'll roar, he'll prevail against his enemies. So he says it's time to praise the Lord. God is going to do a work, and the work that He's going to do, He says, I've held my peace. I've been patient. And we realize that work that we're thinking about that He was going to do is the coming of Jesus. He was going to bring about a change. He was going to do a work and cry out forcibly. He says, I'll make a waste of mountains and hills. And, those that were all exalted in themselves and lifted up, when Jesus came on the scene, certainly He did. He did deal with them. We think about the leaders of His day, those that opposed Him. I think they thought they won when they put Him on the cross, but they really didn't. We think about it was a short space of time until Jerusalem was destroyed. And certainly those leaders that were working so hard to hold on to their own power and to their own importance and all of that, when it was all said and done, they didn't win. Christ, he died on the cross. They thought they'd done away with Him, and within, we can put it this way, within 50 days, the message of Christ was being spread all over Jerusalem in a much, much more pronounced way. in a bolder way. They thought they'd put an end to it so that he wouldn't continue to prosper, and the leaders at that time, it was kind of like they said, no matter what we do, we can't stop Jesus. Well, they nailed him on the cross, and he rose from the dead, and they still hadn't stopped Jesus. His message was going forth, and they called those disciples in. They says, you got to stop talking about Jesus. His name's getting spread all over town. It's gone everywhere. Well, that's because the time had come for God to show his hand, for God to show what he was working on the behalf of mankind. And so he said he laid waste the mountains and hills. All those that thought they were so important, he proved that they could not stop the gospel from going forth. He said to dry up all their herbs. He make the rivers islands. He'll dry up the pools. And then he says, and I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. And we're glad for that way that was provided in Jesus. He said, I'll bring the blind by a way that they knew not. Here's one of the things about the blind, if you stop and think about it. Certainly back then, they maybe didn't altogether know how to use all the things that people use today to try to help the blind to get around. But I'm sure that blind people, if they followed the same path every time, they got to where they could kind of tell they were on the path. They couldn't see it, but they could tell by the feel of it and the shape of it and whatnot. But he says, I'm going to bring them by a way that they knew not. I'll lead them in paths that they have not known. So they were going to have the guidance of God, the presence of God, to take them through things that previously they hadn't been able to see. He said, I'll make the darkness light before them and the crooked things straight. And I believe what that tells us is, if we really think about it, we were blind in our trespasses and our sins. We were walking down the same old path, you might say, doing the same old things over and over again. But in Jesus, God gave us guidance and direction so that we can walk in a different way. We can walk in the way that's straight. We can walk in the way that's right. And he says, these things I will do unto them and not forsake them. So we're thankful that God could pick us up out of our sin, give us guidance, give us direction, give us His Holy Spirit to be our guide, and we can have the presence of God to go with us as we go along the path of life and we face all of the things that it can bring and that it come. But he says, they shall be turned back, greatly ashamed, that trust in graven images, and that say to the molten images, you are our gods. And so the people, the people there at that place, where Moses and them were at the mount before God, at a certain level they had to decide, were they going to hold on to their idols or were they going to enjoy the presence of God? Today it's the same way. People hold on to various things and it keeps them away. It keeps them back. It keeps them from being able to enter into God's presence. We really don't have to settle for that. We don't have to settle for that kind of a life. But because Jesus died on the cross, because He came, he got victory over the devil. He defeated all of the work that the devil had done. If we'll turn to God through Jesus, we can be one of those people that have come out from the world and from the sin, the wickedness, from the devil, and we can live our life in God's presence. And we're thankful that Jesus did that for us. We're thankful for what God has provided, and that today we can be one of those people that has found grace in the eyes of God so that we can be reconciled and walk with Him and enjoy His presence. Certainly, we think about those that don't know God, that don't know Jesus, that haven't found that walk with God. The gospel is, come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I will give the assurance and the blessing that comes by knowing God Himself.